interested in who those land owners work with, talk to, and interact with. And there are 10 main groups of actors that private forest owners have discussed issues related to the management of their forest lands. For the group of 42 individuals, the sum of all ties or interactions was 151. And of those, 30 were with timber buyers and loggers. But aggregated, the categories, the natural resource related categories of actors constituted the largest group. If you look at the percentages, that's about a quarter of all categories of social actors. And just to facilitate a little bit more the exploratory analysis as a data reduction approach, we constructed an index of qualitative variation, which is the analog of standard deviation for a categorical type of variable. So given the 10 categories of social actors and the group of 39 people, because there are 3 people who did not have any network members, so that the size was 0. So we used the group of 39 people, and we constructed an index that ranges between 0 and 1, and is an indication of how representative and how diverse the landowner network is. And we can see this is fairly diverse, and there's a fairly equal representation among the 10 groups. Another interesting thing is that what was the content? What was channeled through these interactions between landowners and the group of the 10 group of actors? It was mainly information and advice. People were interested in learning. But also there was technical assistance and service, because this is part of why they needed timber buyers and loggers to do the actual work, or sometimes professional foresters, as well as legal consultation and enforcement. Again, this is part of the exploratory analysis. We used a non-parametric analog of the student t-test to compare groups, and there's no claim to statistical validity here, but the main purpose was to see to what extent the network size and diversity differed between people who are active or passive managers, between those who have used resource professionals and have not, and so forth. Ownership size represents whether landowner has a total land holding of 50 acres, below 50 acres, or higher than 50 acres. And a few things to point here is that we found a fairly interesting difference in the group of people who have used natural resource professionals in terms of their network size. But also, there was a difference in the size and diversity of landowners based on how much land in total they owned. So as you can see, this is depicted on the box plot representation of network size and diversity by small landholders and large landholders. There's a fairly strong difference in terms of their size as well as diversity. This is part of the exploratory data analysis. We next thought, ownership size matters for the size and diversity of these networks. But we're really interested in the amount or the share of forest that's on these lands. So we looked at the percent forest in 2008 by network size, as well as by the size of land holding, less or more than 50 acres. Two things to point out here is that most of the landowners had more than 50% of their land forested. No clear pattern in terms of no clear pattern in the distribution of forest land by type of land holding. However, most of the large landowners, the people who had land in excess of 50 acres, had network size above the average for the sample. As you can see by the solid circles, about 2/3 of the people who have more than 50 acres had a network size above 4 members, above 4 people in the network. So we thought, when people have more land, they talk to more people, we might expect similar outcomes. So we looked at the change in forest on the land between 1998 and 2008 by parcel acreage. So for the sampled parcels, for the 42 sampled parcels, most of the change occurred, I mean, there was really plus minus 5 acres over a 10-year period. And there was really no connection in terms of the size or diversity of the network of these people, with the exception of 2 cases. There was an increase of about 14 acres on one parcel and a loss of 10 acres. So we decided, let's look at these 2 cases. There's something interesting that's going on, but let's compare them to another parcel, to another landowner who's more representative of the average of the no change. And just as an illustration, this is the parcel with the increase in 10 acres. The light green area represents the reforestation taking place, and it was about 75% increase in the forest cover, again over a 10-year period. And this is the parcel, the red area represents the loss of forest for a 10-year period, and it's about 21% of the parcel area. But it was only after talking to the landowner that we learned that this change on the land actually occurred prior to him taking ownership, that he had bought the land right after it was timbered. And so comparing these 3 landowners, it was first of all interesting to see that where the loss is, where the deforestation case is, the current owner is not responsible for the change. And that in fact what was happening on the land, the land change, was this conditioning or a bridging factor between the current landowner and others in his network. Because currently he's working with wildlife biologists and professional foresters, and he's restoring the land through a government grant, through the Wildlife Habitat Enhancement Program grant. So he has worked with those individuals, he has successfully obtained this grant, and he's doing activities on the land. He's co-providing, but he's also co-producing ecosystem services. And this illustrates the limitations of the remote sensing analysis and the land cover change detection analysis, because the data has to be timed for us to be able to connect it to the social dimension. And interestingly, on the case where there was no real increase, yet there was conservation, which is provision and co-provision of ecosystem services, we learned even more that that person is working with friends as well as neighbors, and he's making sure that there are no invasive species, that he is managing for both recreation, aesthetics, but also for economic benefits, because he's interested in timbering in the future. So looking at the content and the function of the network context of these landowners is important in conjunction with the network size, in order to gain a better idea of the implications for the co-provision and co-production of ecosystem services. But there are a lot of things, but I've summarized it in 3 points that we need to keep in mind as we continue with this type of work. It's very important to know who is interacting and what's the nature of that interaction in terms of the function of these social contexts serve, but also the time scale and the time horizons. There are different time scales for ecological, the forest ecosystem versus the human system, and this is nicely illustrated by one comment by a landowner who said, well, we had the feeling that trees grow slowly, and there are more important, more pressing things right now. So we'll just let the trees mature their own, and when we have time, we'll attend to them. So that's the human side of it. But keep in mind that there are other actors involved in these decisions and actions as well, and we'd like to account for those. And there are methodological and practical implications. One of it, as I mentioned, is the limitations of using change detection analysis for the purposes of answering the questions we are asking. But also that the structure of the network on its own is not sufficient, that in itself the effects of the structure are always mediated by the content of the specific relations and interactions. And I'll leave it here for questions.